Snail, our head of education, who is behind the scenes running our Zoom for tonight's program. It is my pleasure this evening to be welcoming renowned Chicano muralist and artist Judith F. Baca, who is one of the 3 artists in our exhibition, Poetic Justice: Judith F. Baca, Mildred Howard, and John Quick-to-See Smith. We will also be having a public program Saturday, May 28th, with all 3 artists and the poets that we commissioned for Poetic Justice. And it will happen on Saturday, May 28th at 10:30 a.m. in the St. Francis Auditorium. And that day will also be a community day at the museum with free admission for all and educational programs and projects to work on throughout the museum. So tonight, as I've said before, I'm really honored to have Judith F. Baca here to tell us a little bit about some early influential works that she has made, to update us on the Great Wall of Los Angeles, and to talk a little bit about her work with community and digital imagery. Thank you so much for coming tonight, Judy. And I will step back a little bit and let you, I want to show some works from the exhibition. I forgot the whole start of this.
Yes.
So here is an overview of the exhibition of the 3, mostly featuring Judy's work. These are the 2 digitally created ponchos, as well as the work documentation from the vanity table performance. And then here we see a couple of images from the exhibition that include reproductions of panels from the Great Wall of LA, as well as the Paletas por la Frontera, which is a piece that the museum was happy to commission from Judy, especially for this exhibition. And I will show this slide and then move into this. And I don't know, Judy, do you want to talk a little bit about this before we get started?
Yes, the paleta cart is actually a kind of confrontation of reality and non-reality. I mean, what is happening along the border, and particularly people coming up into Los Angeles, they come on this train that is called the Bestia. And the Bestia is a beast, essentially, and the young people, mostly teenagers and young men coming to work, ride the top of the train. And so that's what that is. And there's this amazing events that occur where families come out. These women actually here are handing up food to the kids on the train. And they come out every night as they come by. A lot of people fall from the top of the train and are dismembered or killed. It's a really, really treacherous journey. And for example, here where I live in Venice, California, many of the Oaxaqueños come up on this train. And then the front of the cart is what an ice cream cart should be, really. This sort of like the bells that ring and the children running out and being joyful about the fact that there's ice cream available, right? But in truth, they're struggling with what's happening in our communities, that children are being put in cages, they're being detained at the border. And this is also an intent to give people an opportunity to make their own petitions for the safe passage of their children. And this is actually sort of taken from a place in Tijuana that is the tomb of Juan Soldado, which I went to visit, and I saw all of these petitions, like, please help my child get across the border safely. In other words, people terrified that they have to make a journey that is an odious journey that their families would not want them to take, but they must take because of the conditions in where they're living. So you can write your own petition. You can drop it into the paleta cart, and the petitions grow in power and spirit as people essentially pray for safe passage.
So great. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now so that you can begin your presentation. But I wanted to give a few images of the installation and also show that brand new piece, which we're thrilled to be showing for the first time anywhere.
Yes, thank you. That was really fun. That's my first view of the show, actually, because we didn't get to have our opening. What a drag! We didn't have the capacity to open. Are you seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so I have to go back and get to screen share. Wait a minute. How is that going to get back? Okay, I'm going to go screen share. And here we go. Sorry, I had to start over. Okay, now are you seeing it? Mary, I don't hear you. Could you turn your sound on?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to, I'm doing just a kind of quick overview of a number of my public works and in a presentation that I call Sites of Public Memory. And essentially it's about the notion of that the land has memory, and that if you are working in the creation of public artworks that are placed into the land, then it's very important to begin to listen to that land, to listen to the space and the place and the people who have been there. And I created this slideshow because it kind of coincides with the exhibition. I have a retrospective currently up at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. And in that, we've kind of taken almost 45 years of work and looked at the trajectory of that work. And this is really one of my most early works, and it's a work that's owned by the Smithsonian in the Latino Treasures collection. And this is actually Judy Baca, 1976, as the Pachuca. And it's a triptych, and it was resurrected for an exhibition called Radical Women. And actually, since that time, the Chicana triptych, or the Tres Marias, has been traveling a great deal and has actually resonated with another generation of young people, even though it was done in 1976. It's composed of these two panels. The Pachuca on the right is actually the counterpart to the Zoot Suiters of that era, right after the war. And the person on the left is Flaca, who is a young Chicana from my neighborhood in Pacoima, where I was born. The center image is Amir. And what I was dealing with at that time, in that very early work of mine, was the identities what was my identity as a Chicana? I mean, what did I have as a possibility for me? And aside from the fact that it would be, a mother, a virgin, or a whore. I mean, there seem to be like very limited ideas about who you could become. And that's why the mirror is in the center. So anybody who steps up into view this becomes the third Maria, an alternate to that vision. And this is me kind of, performing, dressed for the performance as the show opened in the Women's Building in 1974. This was, or 1976. This was a very early first Chicana show in Los Angeles, in which the women showed separately from the men. And there were 5 of us. Each of us taking what we called one of the venas de la mujer. So it was called Venas de la Mujer. And I took this Chorla, this big Pachuca, who was really interesting to me because of the fact that she was essentially creating facades that really dealt with the kind of denigration of Chicanas. That she was not a hot tamale. She was not going to be a chica. She wasn't somebody that you called out on the street. She was somebody to deal with. And I actually turned myself into her. I was actually becoming my cousin, my cousin who was a Pachuca. And I shaved my eyebrows and I ratted my hair and I transformed myself, and I went to the opening like this. And above you can see these small slides that are in the Women's Building archive. Me talking to a group of young women I brought from my neighborhood to paint the background of the big heart. And there it's in the background, it says Mi Barrio Pacoima, and it shows the names of the different girls and the veins coming out of it. My mother and sister are giving me a garter belt and making sure that I have nylons with the seam down the back. I mean, can you remember that those nylons were pretty difficult to get on, and then to get the seam straight was kind of an ordeal. So I'm preparing for the opening. There's a young Judy Baca getting ready to become the Pachuca for that night. And these are photographs taken by Donna Deitch, a wonderful photographer who is also co-founder of Spark. One of the founders, Christina Schlesinger, Donna Deitch, and I. And these photographs were me acting out the chuka. And I was actually sort of getting into the faces and the facades that she used to ward off people and to also, become this highly desirable creature. So here I am smoking. Really amazingly, the smoke came out as a heart. That's not Photoshop. That actually happened. So here is Flaca and I. Flaca, who I invited to come and paint with me to paint the background. And I just received a message from her last night, which is pretty extraordinary of her today. And she's become quite famous for this image. But Flaca was, you can see the difference of 20 years because the chuka would have been prevalent in the late 40s, early 50s, and early 60s. And Flaca, this look in which she's wearing hush puppies and she's wearing the khakis, would have been the 70s. So in other words, there was a transformation of the capacity to women to wear pants and, to take on some of the guise of the boys in the neighborhood. At that time, I was working very intently in the neighborhoods of Los Angeles, and these are the kind of things that we were dealing with in the parks. And these are roll calls of different kids from the neighborhood, and you see this prevalent WF, and in the bathroom on the left, you see VNE repeated. And these are two different neighborhoods that I worked in and began to organize some of the very first mural programs. This is a roll call set of stairs up a place called Blueberry Hill in the White Fence territory. And these are the homeboys from that area. And they're their names, like the names are the names that they're given on the street, like Smokey and, Puppet and Smiley and Osito. And this WF actually starts to become imagery. And you can see the fence is a picket fence, spray painted on. And when I saw all this work and I began to document it and work with the kids, I thought, we're not that far, not that many steps away from making images that might actually be more productive for them to talk about the connections they have between the neighborhoods, so that the warfare that was really prevalent and the number of kids that were dying and were injured by gang warfare could begin to be addressed. So as I was going to the park with the girls, they jumped out of the car and they just spontaneously did their placa on the side of the wall. They can do this in minutes, right? And it was very unusual to see girls do this. And my friend captured it in a photograph. This is the girls that actually almost the entire top row is one family. And I'd said they basically had you can tell really that they kind of look alike. They're practically a baseball team in one family. And so these are the girls that came to do Mi Barrio Pacoima that was part of that exhibition. This is the oldest sister. Of course, there's Flaca. Of course, the thing was that, as we went into the women's building, they didn't quite understand that they were only supposed to paint the mural. So they went into the bathroom and they began to spray paint the entire place. So we ended up having to clean it up. It was like, oh, first protocols and how you do an exhibition, girls. We don't like spray paint the whole house, So there was a vanity table and a mirror in which you could see me transform from this character to the Pachuca as we're preparing here for it. The Venice of the Mujer was Josefina Quesada became a worker in the factory. Judith Hernandez became a sort of grieving mother, like a Llorona. Isabel Castro became a revolutionary. So each of us took a different aspect of the women that we knew, looking at the expansion of the roles of women and beginning to question how we were defined by our culture. And as the exhibition the work has come out of the archives of the Smithsonian and begun to travel again, what's fascinating is the number of selfies. Now, literally, there are thousands of them. In fact, at the Hammer, when the show opened, there was a line. I couldn't figure out, why was the line so long? Why can't we get in? And the reason we couldn't get in is people were taking a photograph in front of the mirror. And so I have now hundreds and hundreds of these images of people becoming the third Maria. And a lot of young men as well become the third Maria. She also became this piece more recently, which is called Absolutely Chicana, and a serigraph image that I did for Self-Help Graphics. So this was actually, this was in 1976. And at the same time, I was beginning the work in the creation of a giant mural that has been basically a life's work. And it's important to start with this image, which is to recognize that Los Angeles, like all great cities, was founded on the basis of a river, on the banks of a river. And this river had people. This is a Tongva woman. She would have been one of the original people. I found her image, a team and I as we were working on the mural, a mural for USC, we found this in the archives, and it basically said anonymous Gabrielino Nation woman, right? Gabrielino meaning she was named for the mission that she would have been affiliated with as a neophyte. And she's naked to the waist, which is, after the invention of the camera. So it's a really questionable image. Where did it come from? What is happening to her? And the look in her face is so profound. And so this became an image that has kind of followed me a great deal. And in fact, it's become an image that the Tongva people have embraced, and they use it for all kinds of things, like their award ceremonies and their, scholarships. And we named her Toy Purina. Well, she couldn't possibly be Toy Purina. Toy Purina led a revolt against the Mission San Gabriel in 1785. And this, of course, was after the invention of the camera. So Toy Purina is who might have lived alongside of the river. And the river was, of course, subject to expansion. It was a very small, kind of almost creek-like river that expanded in the winter, contracted in the summer. But every once in a while, it was subject to growing rather large in rainstorms and flooding the early founding of the city. And you'll notice something really significant about this. This is about 1879, that those staircases going up to the doorways, that the doorways are almost 5 feet off the ground. So this is people actually building to accommodate the fact that flooding was a regular thing. But in the late 20s, after a rather major flood, the city fathers determined that the river had to be tamed, that the river could no longer expand its boundaries, and that real estate was our most valuable commodity in Los Angeles. So they began to systematically concrete every existing arroyo in the city of Los Angeles. What they left was these concrete channels. And of course, it created all kinds of conditions that we still suffer. In other words, the water came down from the mountains and went to the ocean much more quickly than it should. Therefore, it never replenished the aquifer, that never got filtered. So the pollutions came more rapidly to the ocean and essentially destroyed the Santa Monica Bay and the life in the Santa Monica Bay. It created these divisions between communities of these sort of concreted areas that left dirt belts on either side, looking something like this. It was this site that I came to in 1976, around the time the show was opening, in which the Army Corps of Engineers said, we are thinking that, we're done with all the concreting of the rivers. And unlike God, who would look up at the seventh day and said, this is good, they said, we made a terrible mistake. We have created these dirt belts. We have, these are eyesores. What could we do? And so they selected a part of the reach of the channel, which was coming down from the mountains to the San Gabriel Mountains, and said, we see you working in the streets with the kids painting these murals. Would you consider painting in this site? And we want to build a park along here. And so you can see here, this is actually almost the earliest days. They're beginning the parks. I work with them on the design of the park. Now, if you go along this park, the trees are, giant trees, and it's all greened. And you can see people preparing the walls below, where we will actually begin the painting of a piece that has been called now the Great Wall of Los Angeles. This is the kind of pollution that went to the ocean as a result of things draining from the streets and going down toward the sea. And those drawings that you saw on the wall, all the graffiti and the placas, there was prominent WF everywhere, and it was done by this young boy. And this Fernando was a mentee of mine, and he was working with me on a first mural that I did in Hollenbeck Park, and he was stabbed in an inter-conflict between two different gangs, and he had 13 stab wounds, and he lived through this event, but he came back for the dedication of this first mural, and it was called Mi Abuelita. And I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm okay, but my body is a map of violence." And so I began to design tattoos for him. And so the outcome of this was that he would take off his shirt and say, "I'm Judy's best artwork." and, but when I saw the river, I felt the same. I felt that it was a scar, and that we could tattoo it, and that perhaps we could recover the story of the people, which was disappeared as well. In other words, if you could disappear a river, how much easier is it to disappear the stories of the people who lived along the river? And so I thought we could bring the disparate groups of Los Angeles together racially and neighborhood-wise, and begin to tattoo the river, tattoo the scar where the river once ran. And so that is the basis, the sort of hidden message of the Great Wall that I really never spoke aloud to the Army Corps of Engineers. I only spoke about the fact that we could bring young people from different places and begin to paint a narrative that would tell the stories that were left out of our history books. And this was actually one of our very first meetings on the ground, no place to meet, very little resources in which to do this work. But the major thing was to get everybody paid so that they would have a summer job and that they would begin to transform this. Now you're seeing the park come in, you're seeing us sandblast and clean the walls so that we can begin to paint. Now you're seeing a few years later, as the grass has come in and the trees are beginning to grow, the sandbags pull the water away from the wall, so we're not standing in a giant slip and slide area, and we can begin to paint a narrative that is now 2,740 feet, or half a mile of mural, from prehistoric times to the 1950s. And these are some of the teams in a morning meeting as we're looking at our blue lines, our blueprints, as they begin to do the transferring. So the young people who are coming onto this are between 14 and 21 years of age. They are not necessarily skilled people. They probably never had a job, but they're getting an income for the summer, and they become part of a team that is producing this giant work. And of course, they're complete lunatics, and they're a tremendous amount of fun. I actually have to say that I know most of these kids still over all these years. We became a kind of giant Great Wall family. And in the process, we managed to paint this narrative work. A young boy right in the front who's looking out is actually a set designer now. And the girl in the back with her little paintbrushes in her hair runs her own company and is a graduate of UCLA. So in other words, all of these kids have transformed in some rather profound ways in the process of doing this work. It wasn't that I was trying to breed artists so much as I was trying to breed citizens, as I was trying to bring them into relationship to each other in a diverse and multicultural city, in a city in which the divisions between us were profound and geographically divided, so that oftentimes there would be almost no place where these kids would meet because our schools were so segregated. So to begin to put this in place and then to study each other's story became the subject of the Great Wall. I'm painting here a section of the Dust Bowl refugees as people are coming during the 1930s. And you can see here, this is called the Weeping Woman series. And this is from the Japanese as they're being taken to Manzanar and leaving their gardens in East Los Angeles. Many of these people's families' homes were maintained by Mexican neighbors. And so this is actually one of my favorite segments. So you can get a look at, over a summer, we would paint 350 feet. It would be about 50 people. And we did it summer after summer. So the first summer was pretty crazy with 80 people, and I didn't quite have the technique down. But as we went along, we got better at providing the educational premise for the youth, for creating a method of the application of the mural. And we were able to produce work that is still sometimes the only representation of the story that has been left out of history books. This is the spaceship coming down into Chavez Ravine, which was the oldest Mexican community in LA. You see a family being divided by the freeways. And you see Mrs. Archiaga, who is being carried off by a cop, fighting to keep her home in a place called Chavez Ravine, in what was the early Sonora town, the very earliest image that we saw of the city of Los Angeles.
So I want to interject a little bit here, because so much of the production of the Great Wall is also is learning these histories and going to archives and using those images from archives. And I just want to make sure that people understood that, because you were also, not only were they translating them to the mural, they were learning those stories of each other.
Right, and they were also going out to sites. For example, we went into the Chinese catacombs under Alvera Street. We went to places that actually were the places where history occurred, so that it became living to them. And actually, it's interesting because when you talk to them now as adults with children, their age or older, when they were making the mural, they say that was one of the most profound pieces of experience, like to meet people who went through something like the Holocaust and to talk to them about that, and then to begin to understand that relationship of that history to their own story. So this is now we're in the 50s, and this is the forebearers of civil rights, and this is Paul Robeson, whose image is not well known, but there's Paul standing in the front of the bus, and the very back of the bus is Martin Luther King. The woman with the microphone is Big Mama Thornton, who basically, her music, "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," was taken up by Elvis Presley, and of course Rosa Parks and Gwendolyn Brooks, who was a first Pulitzer Prize winner, Ralph Bunche, the first Nobel Peace Prize winner in the 1950s. The story of the Great Wall now is become an interesting model for the way to work in the creation of a public monument and the way to work in engage with community. This is Ernestine Jimenez, who came to us at 14, and I brought her on to the production by the time she was 16. I think I met her just before that time, actually. And she was incarcerated and she was pregnant. She was a gang member. She came from a family of 16 children, a very poor family. And people said to me, as I was interviewing, "Don't take Ernie. She's just not going to be, her brother was killed in interracial warfare. She's not going to cooperate." So I always like a challenge. I basically really liked Ernie, and I said, I want to bring her on. So this is Ernie 2 years afterwards. She was 14 when she started. She was 16 here, and this is her son, and she's on the Great Wall, and he was one of our mascots. He would come in and out of the production. This is her at 18 years old, as she became a crew leader, and then a supervisor. This is her 30 years later with her son, speaking on national TV about the importance of this experience. And it's not that she became a scholar or that she became high-powered in a job, but that she actually transitioned from all of this life and managed to raise her son. I just think it'd be important for you to hear a few minutes of Ernie's voice. Let's see if we can get it going.
The way I grew up is, you fight through life. I've got 10 brothers and 6 sisters, and I'm the baby. And it was a fight in my house all the time. And that's the way I believed you were supposed to have grown up, to fight through life. Don't like nobody but your own race. And even sometimes don't even like your own race. There was a lot of tension. I think everybody wanted to fight everybody, just the way they looked. or the way they looked at them or the way they dressed. And after time, you just started getting to know that person as an individual instead of knowing them as you were taught to, you know. And everybody became very good friends. So it took a lot of growing up. I'm not saying that first year did it, because it didn't. It took a lot of growing up. But I made a lot of friends through 4 years, and every year I understood something else. Every year. I wouldn't have went back to high school because I wouldn't have had a role model to push me to go there. Education was Judy's #1 thing. As long as I stood in school, you could come back and paint the mural. And that's what, even though I got in trouble in school and fought and everything, that was my #1 goal. I wanted to come back. I had to come back. What really kind of freaked me out though is when I met the people that, when we painted the mural of the Holy Cross, and I met the people that had the tattoos on them, that kind of blew my mind. That made me cry. Because I know there was another world that was harder than mine. And I just really felt for it. This mural opened my eyes so much. Even when I'm down and out, I still walk by here. And I thank God I did accomplish something in life. And it makes me feel good. And I think if it wasn't for this mural, for me to have my name on it and to have accomplished something, I don't know where I'd be.
It's powerful. And I'm amazed how in touch you are with everybody for so many years.
Yeah, I tell them, you know, I get Mother's Day cards and I send them, I always say, don't call me your mother. But they do it to make me mad. You know, there is a kind of a recognition really that it's a family connection, that that we went through something together that was profound. And we came back actually and did a major restoration in 2011 with support to do that. And this is a real quick view of what happens after a mural is 35 years old, and how do you keep it in place. And this is us on that restoration team. And you know, this is some of the mural that is actually fading and delaminating. This is before. That's after the restoration. I love this because it looks so easy, right? It's like you press the button and it transforms. I love this. This is the migrant workers coming into the fields of California. McCarthyism and the Red Scare, the House on Un-American Activities making up a big trash can, and the blacklist. Chavez Ravine, which is the story of the the spaceship is Dodger Stadium. This is a section, this is missing 700 feet, but this is a view down the channel in terms of the scale of the work. Hard to imagine the scale of the Great Wall. It is 8 acres. It's an 8-acre monument, and today we are developing the next part of the Great Wall. We have been supported by the Mellon Foundation to produce 50s to the contemporary time. So I'm embarking on this now with a new crew of people to develop the next segments of the Great Wall. And the alumni will be coming back to teach the young people, to talk to the young people. We'll be placing an interpretive green bridge over the site about midway, so that from the center of the mural, you can look to both directions. The laser cut images on the railing are giving you an idea of what was there before the river was concreted. So it's making the connection between the environmental history and the social history for the first time. We're using a sort of stratified layers with material inside of them. to show what kind of pollution has occurred. And, we're using tin cans at the base. And then as it comes up to water bottles, the kind of stuff that we're dealing with, which hopefully will be a way of teaching people about the preservation of the environment. The interpretive stations, there are 5 of them going in right now. In fact, if you went to the Great Wall today, you'd be seeing these interpretive stations being poured and being set up. And you can walk along, and then you'll be able to read the content of the Great Wall. Most exciting is that this is a very dark area, and we will be at some point throwing the switch, and the Great Wall will light up. It will light up at night, making the walking trails much more usable, and seeing a ribbon of color in that darkness. So this is what's happening right now with the Great Wall as it becomes advanced and completed, essentially a life's work. So I'm going to show just 2 more pieces quickly, and that is about how are we doing, Mary, on time? Are we?
We're doing well. And I don't have the chat up to see if we have had any questions coming in so far. But let's go a little bit through the Denver International Airport and talk a little bit about your use of digital imagery. And this will also illustrate some of the process, which
Right.
is, the murals themselves are amazing and beautiful and, filled with information, but they're also a conceptual project, of gathering information and working in all kinds of ways before you get to the final process. So this, I think, would be a great way to illustrate that.
Right. So this is a commission for the Denver International Airport, the big canopy, the canvas canopy. And it's part of a series that's called La Memoria de Nuestra Tierra. It's about memory in the land, which of course has been the recurring theme through my work. This is my, probably the reason for that is because of my grandmother. This is Francisca, who raised me in my first years, and as my mother worked in a factory. And she in her life and world, everything had its place. And she could take a dry twig and turn it into a plant, and she would do healing processes with hierbas, and like many women of her generation, she was a very powerful spiritual force. So this mural is really about her story and her my family's arrival in the United States, and it's in the central terminal of the Jepson terminal at DIA. It's 50 feet long, and you get an overview here. And it's both digitally generated and also hand painted. So the background is completely a narrative of different landscapes they would have had to pass coming from Chihuahua, the northern part of Mexico, into the United States. They never really planned to come into the US, but the revolution was in full swing in about 1919. There was devastation going on all over the northern part of Mexico. And my grandfather had been robbed going for supplies to the north, and my grandmother had been robbed on their ranch, and so they packed up and left with almost nothing, and came north and went to Colorado to my grandfather's grandfather, and so this is a view of this piece, and the embedding of different images into the landscape. So this is a Chihuahuan miner, because the choice he would have had about what work to do when he got here, leaving his ranch, was he could have gone into the mines. Here is an image that I found in my research of Corky Gonzalez and Cesar Chavez meeting to discuss the grape boycott in Colorado. This is a woman from the Cheyenne massacre at Sand Creek, who was a survivor of that on the corner of the Luisa Maria Baca land grant, which I think actually probably with deeper research, I might be able to find some relationship between my family and that site, because there were many water springs there, springs for fresh water. And my great-great-grandfather was bringing water to southeastern Colorado from with Clydesdale horses, and from some places like seemed like New Mexico. I mean, it was probably the place where the Bacas had a land grant that was given from Mexico. So that, Baca's like Smith in New Mexico, right? We're clearly of that land. My grandfather.
Baca and Cedar Bacas.
And what?
And Cedar Bacas.
Yeah, right. So here is my grandfather in a first box I did in revealing the story in a railroad museum, a tiny little railroad museum in Colorado. I found this picture, and it was my grandfather, the only person facing out with his gray sweater, and my mother was with me at the time, and she said, "Oh my God, that's my father." So I was like, "Oh, it can't be this easy. It can't be this easy that I can find this research so quick." But it was all meant to be. So that's Theodoro Baca, and the figures who are walking on the water are my grandparents and Jesus Baca, who is my uncle, my mother's brother, and the Ludlow Strike is up above. That was about the mining interests in outside of Denver. And also there's a reference to Reyes Tijerina, who was the first person to fight about the sovereignty movement to recover the lands given that were basically land grants from to people that were not honored when Mexico was annexed into the United States in 1848. So, in 1848, California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, the Texas, the huge third of Mexico was taken into under the United States. So this is them walking, and as they're walking on the water, they're walking like walking on water. It's not that they're running from a truck, scattering like little cockroaches from take an aerial view in the news because they're illegal immigrants. So the border really is pretty much non-existent. There was no checking at the border, and the Cheyenne woman is represented in the water. There's Theodoro, and of course in his body are the fields, and to the right is the railroad. My grandfather, that's his friend, his best friend, who was a pianist. He used to play the piano. My grandmother talked about his piano playing, and the women are working in the railroad. My grandfather chose the railroad, so he worked in the railroad, and it's the railroad that brought my mother here and my family here to Los Angeles. This is a Ludlow Strike, and the story. This is the story of the mining interest where people had to buy their food from the mine, had to get their housing from the mine, and that wonderful old song that said, you load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and a deeper in debt. Well, this is it. That's the story of Ludlow. And people still wear t-shirts that say, "Remember Ludlow." We created these figures like mesas, like they were giant mountains. And part of the other thing was the reason why I took this commission was that my mother was, who's there in the magenta, looking glamorous in the magenta jacket with white hair, was on a mission that my grandfather's grave and the graves of Mexicans in this little town that she was born in, called La Junta, the Junction, outside of Denver, had not been maintained. Those graves were allowed to go fallow, and there was no marker any longer for my grandfather or two of her sisters and other relatives. And so part of this was the recovery of that grave, of these grave sites, and very much the same as in the Deep South, the loss of the sites of public memory, of the place that you would remember your family that had passed. So these people all traveled to Denver, to Colorado, for this moment in which we re-bless the graves, and including my Hopi aunt and my mother's sister, and all of a number of our family members were here to remark La Familia Baca, a gravesite. So I will end with that, right?
Great. Yeah. I think that would be good because we're about 45 minutes in. But I wanted to ask you, I want to thank you and say how profound the work is, and that I just so appreciate not only the artistic quality, but the integrity and the seriousness and the continuity. And part of the reason we called the exhibition Poetic Justice was really to champion that duration, but that your work and your commitment to your work, as well as Jean and Mildred's. So I already talked a little bit about the mural production being kind of a more than just the production of the mural, but this whole process. But I also wanted to have you share a little bit about Spark.
Okay.
Because you brought that up, and I don't know if anybody knows who that is.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to stop the screen sharing, so I'm trying to do that, but
I'm gonna pretend like I'm gonna share, and that'll close it.
okay.
And
Great.
then I'll unshare. How's that sound?
Oh, that's good because I can find the unshare. There we go.
Now we're on the screen.
Now we're back to normal, right? Thank you. I am a co-founder of an organization that began in 1976, around the same time the Great Wall began, because in fact, I started the Great Wall, and then I realized that we needed to have a method of seeking funding to pay the kids and to begin to do public works that needed nonprofit support. So the Social and Public Art Resource Center, which, as I said, was invented by myself, Christina Schlesinger, who's still on our board and a really critical member of our organization, and Donna Deitch, a filmmaker. The three of us came together and created the organization. And then the organization from the very beginning was very interested in alternate ways of supporting artists. We were interested in making it possible for, privileging women, privileging people of color, allowing people to make work that was politically charged. And of course, at that time, that was just not possible. That was very difficult to do. So that's how Spark began. And it's actually, I think, stayed very true to its mission for 45 years.
Congratulations on 45 years. That's amazing.
It's it is a miracle.
As an artist and an activist, you've worked across so many communities, engaging with the women at the Women's Building, working with youth in throughout the city of Los Angeles, and as part of the artist community in Venice Beach, organizing, leading mural teams, so many hats. Is it your ability to work across communities that drew you to public work, or is that just what makes you so good at it?
I think it's my life of being born in Watts, right? Which was a Black community at that time. As a little girl, I was I grew up in a Black community for the first 7 years of my life, and then moved to Pacoima. And in Pacoima, again, it was designated as a Black covenant region. In other words, designated for minorities to work in the aircraft industry or in the GM plants. So in other words, the appropriation of spaces for living was controlled by that. And so I ended up in communities where my best friends were of color and different, right? So that's part of what I think did it. And the other part of it is also, like, schools were closed every year between Black and brown fighting, in Pacoima Junior High. There was all these struggles around interracial warfare. And also the Valley is very, very difficult in terms of its race relations. It never really kind of got that we needed to live together in some harmonious way. It was the site for white flight, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's what made me approach things in this way. And I got good at it because I just really fell in love. I mean, I started out pissed off, and then you can't stay pissed and continue to do this kind of work. You have to do it from love. And I love those kids. They were funny, and they were a great, not only did they amuse me, but they elevated my thoughts about what needed to happen in the world.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And I think I've mentioned this before. It's so clearly so important for you and everybody you worked with because you've all stayed in such close contact. So we have a couple of comments here, and I want to offer anybody the opportunity to send a question. One is a person who's Jean Stevens, who said her mother was born in LA in 1900. You've illuminated some of her history, and that she took a painting class with you at UCI in 1986, and it was impressive for her. So I just wanted to make sure to add that. And then one question we did get is, will you be using digital imagery when you're working on the extension of the Great Wall of LA?
Yes, in one way. In other words, the digital imaging makes the process of visualizing stuff, imagery, faster. So in other words, typically you might look at a photograph, let's say of the Watts riots or of a particular historic Rodney King's meeting, and then you would sit there and kind of render images from that or with that idea behind it, right? Today, with the digital imaging, we can bring up a digital image and we can start from that and then derive something from it. But the final imagery will be rendered in the traditional way. It will be turned into maquettes. It'll be hand colored with pastels and Prismacolors, and then it will go into paint. And the painting will be done this time, amazingly, interiorly. In other words, we will not be in the channel.
Oh.
And the reason for that is that the channel becomes increasingly dangerous with the weather conditions being unpredictable. And we've had near misses repeatedly. And in 1984, we lost one of our people went down the channel 6 miles and was rescued in this miraculous rescue by helicopter. And I prefer not to have that experience again. And I think it's possible now, and it's so hot in the concrete channel that if we can do it in an interior space, which we're now calling the Great Wall Institute, and we're putting out into the world that we need the space. It's sort of like, you dream it and you imagine it and you wish for it, and then somehow it kind of works, so I'm hoping it'll work, and we'll work in an interior space. And that means that people will be able to teach year round with young people and with other painters. So I want to see another generation of muralists come from this training. I want to see myself step back and see it continue without me. I'm going to be working on the design, so there's going to be I'm intently starting the designing work, and I'll be looking for illustrators to work with me and other artists to help me conceptualize, and a lot of thinkers. A lot of people already have been interviewed, and we're looking for people who live through a particular experience, but also historians and thought people, leaders.
That's great. And I'm sorry, I'm checking to make sure I'm not missing anything here. And I wanted to just add to that, while you won't be using imagery directly digitally, even the early panels, you were working from photographic sources, or panels, not the right word, but the early sections, you were, you were working from photographic material, as you illustrated too with the Denver airport image.
Right. Well, and the Denver airport, we use direct photographic apparitions to come up through the land. And in this case, we won't be doing that. We'll be doing, they might be apparitions, but it would not, certainly there's going to have to be apparitions. There's going to have to be some magic somewhere. But I think mostly what we'll be doing is we'll be creating paintings that will come from references and from, not directly, we never use a direct reference, right? Because we originate, we try to originate and infuse a sensibility about that moment. So we're interpreting, and we're coming from the interpretation of people of color of that experience. It's not neutral. In other words, no history representation is neutral. It has a position, a point of view. For example, if we're talking about Rodney King and we're talking about police violence, then it's within the context of a larger set of issues of police violence in Los Angeles and in the country.
Right. We have one more question that has 2 aspects to it. One is, do you know how many more feet will be added to the mural? Will you
Yes,
be
it'll-
working
it'll
in decades again?
It'll be doubled. And it will be coming back the opposite side. So in other words, it'll be circular, so it'll be on two sides of the channel.
Great. And do you have any idea how long this will take?
Yes, I have
Fair
actually,
question.
I have 2 more years to do it.
Okay, great.
2 years, and then the actual painting will begin in year 3. But that means we have to raise that money. In other words, we're not funded for the final painting yet.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So, and people can find out about updates and things on your website and on the Spark website?
Absolutely. On the Spark website, we're keeping, you'll start to see, there should be materials coming up shortly, and also on our Instagram and our social media, where Facebook and so forth, we're showing the interpretive stations being built. They're so cool. And we're showing the signage, we're using River Rock for the stone signage. So, you know, we're using materials from the site to tell that story, and there'll be signage at the beginning of the wall and at the end of the wall. And then as we come around the opposite side, we'll be putting up segments at a time. In other words, we won't wait till all other half mile is done. We will finish segments by segments and put them up.
Great, great. Well, Judy, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. And I want to encourage everybody who hasn't seen the exhibition to please come to the exhibition. It's open through June 19th. I also want to remind everybody again about May 28th, where we will have the public program, and Judy will have the opportunity to finally see the exhibition in person.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah, and then I just want to say that you've given a lot of people chances, including me. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, Mary, thank you. It was wonderful when you were with us, and you know, Mary worked with us, and now she has catapulted herself into this position of curating, which is wonderful. I'm so happy. I was so happy to participate with your curation.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And well, I think that's it for now. Thank you, Judy. I will see you in May if we're not communicating before then. And I want to thank everybody else who's joined us tonight.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to meet everybody.
So.